Okay, so let's start the February 12th Planning Commission meeting. And first item on the agenda is agenda changes. Are there any agenda changes? Nothing.
I have none to suggest.
Okay, number 2 is public comments for non-agenda items. Are you guys, Carl, Mike, are you both here for the...
I'm here to listen, yeah.
For the hear, okay.
Yeah.
Carl, are you here for the hearing or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So no public comments. So that leads to number 3, public hearing on the water wastewater allocation scoring system. And I guess we go ahead and open up the hearing. And do you want to give
I
your
can
spiel?
provide
And
a little bit of an overview for both Mike and Carl, but also for the viewing audience at home. I want to say 2 years ago now, the select board appointed an ad hoc committee called the Water Wastewater Allocation Committee and gave them several charges, one of which was to take a look at our current allocation system and see if there was a way to improve it so that we could sort of better leverage this valuable community resource that we are largely giving out on a first come, first served basis now without a whole lot of additional criteria. That committee also looked at a bunch of other things, including how the allocation fee structure works in surrounding towns, similar towns and us, and how other communities deal with allocation issues and the like. In any case, that committee met for 6 months or 9 months or so, and at the end submitted some recommendations to the select board as well as some information. And so I think I included in your packet their recommendations memo, which is several pages, talks about what our capacity for water, municipal water and wastewater is today, and how much we charge compared to other communities. And one of the biggest things they did was they had a lot of discussion about a new allocation model based in part, or at least inspired in part, by what the town of Williston does with their growth management system. And so they proposed an allocation scoring system by which new development would get allocation, but it wouldn't be necessarily a first come, first served basis. It would be based on achieving a score. And therefore it would create more of a competitive system in which multiple projects within any given year that are looking for water and wastewater would be scored, and the project with the best score would actually get their allocation. And if there was a lot of competition that year, some projects might not get allocation, might have to wait and come back the next year or improve their project. So the crux of what this public hearing is about is to talk about that allocation scoring system, which the committee forwarded to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission then discussed and fine-tuned and is now in front of you for public comment. Now, that scoring system would live within a larger construct, which has not been fully fleshed out yet. And that larger construct would be changes to our water and wastewater ordinances, and that would govern how the select board each year would set aside certain pots of allocation and make them available. And one of those pots would be the amount of allocation that would be available within the scoring system. So there's still a lot of work to be done on this concept. But the one piece that's in front of you tonight is just this idea of how you might score development projects. The idea is that right now the select board gives out allocation largely for subdivisions anyways, after the DRB has done a conceptual level review and say, yes, this project sort of passes the straight face test, and it's cleared to move on to more technical level review and survey work and engineering. It's at that point during a subdivision review that an applicant will then go to the select board and say, see, my project at least conceptually looks good. Can I please have allocation so I can, proceed with the rest of the development review process? What's proposed is that that system would change, and that the select board would no longer be making decisions about allocation for specific projects. They would simply make a certain amount of allocation available, and then it would be the development review board that would make those decisions based on this scoring rubric. And that the development review board would do that, it's anticipated once a year. So for all the projects that had been proposed within the prior year and had received that conceptual level approval, a couple months later, the board would look at that collection of projects, would score them, and then would give out the allocation to the projects that scored well. So it's a different sort of process with regard to how allocation is managed by the select board on an annual basis. And it's a different way, it's a different board that would be involved in giving out that allocation based on this scoring model. Now, the scoring model itself is centered on six criteria, or six categories, I guess I should say. And so those categories, the committee that worked this up, which Carl, who was in the audience tonight, was a member of, representing the Affordable Housing Committee, that system has these six categories that pull priorities from the town plan. So the committee wanted to create a system that that basically helped us implement the town plan in one more way. So our zoning regulations help implement the town plan through the types of uses we allow and the design standards that we place when development comes forward. This is a proposed zoning change. This would insert a new chapter in the zoning regulations specific to allocation of municipal water and wastewater just within the service area. So one of the comments I got from a community member was, wait a minute, does this apply to the whole town? And the answer is no. It only applies within the municipal water and sewer service area, which is generally the village, and the Richmond Road corridor up to Iroquois Manufacturing. So within that area, the town provides municipal water and sewer, and we manage that resource, and that's where this zoning change would apply to. But the scoring system would live within the zoning regulations, and that's what the public hearing tonight is about, is a proposed change to the zoning regulations to implement that scoring system. The six criteria or categories that are in it that are prioritized are whether a development project provides any public infrastructure, whether a development project creates jobs, whether a project addresses Hinesburg's housing needs, whether the project proposes stormwater treatment that is above and beyond what we would normally require or what the state would require, whether the project is in a desired location, and also whether it would be redeveloping an existing site or proposing sort of new greenfield development, and how innovative that project actually is. That's a category: location, redevelopment, and innovation. And then the sixth category is whether the project would go above and beyond with regard to energy efficiency and the use of renewable technology. So those are the six categories. In the 8-page scoring system document that's on the website and that's in front of you, you'll see how each of those six categories is described and how many points you can get within each of those categories. Between the six of them, the maximum number of points is 100. 100-point scales seem to be easy for people to understand. And there's a maximum number of points you can earn within any particular category. No one project will ever get the maximum number of points in all categories. That's not really possible. But the system is designed to allow projects to sort of acquire points in an a la carte system in these six categories in various ways. And different projects will have an easier time in different categories. The easiest way to sort of describe it is that a commercial project, let's say a new business wants to come to town, they're not creating any affordable housing, but they very well could be creating jobs. And so they won't be able to get points in the housing needs section of the housing needs category, but they could get points in the job creation category, and vice versa if it's a residential development. So both the committee and the planning commission tried to spread the points out such that a project could could have a reasonable opportunity to acquire points. Generally, though, by doing things above and beyond what the regulations already require. So it's sort of upping the game for development in Hinesburg that's going to be within our water and sewer service area. So that's the 4-minute spiel of the overall system that still needs fleshing out, and the scoring system that's embedded within it that we're here to talk about tonight.
One question that I have that I remember we talked about at the last meeting, I'm not sure if we really came to a conclusion on it, was whether we're going to require projects to have a minimum score.
Yes,
and
so
where we landed with that.
Yeah, so where you landed, that was a subject of conversation both at the allocation committee level and also, which Dan was on that committee before he was on the planning commission, so he and Carl are very familiar with that. At both levels, that we had that conversation, and the draft, as it stands for tonight's hearing, is that there will be a minimum score requirement, and that a purely non-residential project, so a new business or some sort of commercial project, would need to score at least 12 points to be considered for allocation, and that a residential project or a mixed-use project that includes residential and commercial would have to score at least 20 points to be considered for allocation. So the idea being, in any given year, you could have 3 or 4 projects all competing for this allocation and trying to score higher and be the best project they can be. Or you might have a year where there's only one project. And the thought was that we ought to have a minimum score requirement so that even in years where there's only one project, those projects are trying to be the best project they can be in terms of, meeting the intent of our town plan.
So if there's 2 or 3 projects competing in one year, only one of them will get it?
So it depends on how much allocation the select board has put forward for that year, and how much each project is looking for. So in a simplest example, let's say there are 2 projects in that year, and the first project needs 100 gallons per day, and the second project needs 100 gallons per day. They both have the same need. That's what they come in for. And let's say that year the select board allocated only 100 gallons per day for that year's worth of allocation. So in that case, the best project is going to get it, and the second best project isn't. That's how it's thought to work, anyways. Now, obviously, it gets complicated when the select board has 1,000 gallons per day, and you have 2 projects that each want 100 gallons per day. Well, they're probably both going to get it as long as they meet the minimum score. But let's say those 2 projects want, one of them wants 700 gallons per day and the other one wants 2,000, and we only have 1,000 to give. Well, then we're going to score them, and the one that scores highest is going to get priority. And if it's the project that, only needed the 700, they're going to get that. And then what's remaining could flow to the other project, but it won't be enough to satisfy their overall need. So then they might be able to capture that and then have to come back in the next year to gain the rest of what they need. At least that's generally how it works in the Williston model. The details of how we want it to work, whether we want projects to be able to get partial allocation in a year and then string it out to the next year to get more, still have to be figured out within the ordinance changes.
So a large project that's phasing, they could beat out this other one. Let's say they're phasing over 3 years, just for simple math. They could beat out that other person 3 years in a row.
Yes. Yep. And the way the Williston model works, which we haven't quite clarified yet how ours would on this front, is their select board allows a certain amount in each year, and then they say for larger projects you can get that amount in year 1, and you can go out and grab a little bit from year 2 and year 3 They limit how much they can go out and grab so that in year one, you can get the allocation you need for your project. So that's a conversation we need to have about logistics, how this thing would work on that front, but only if the scoring system that has been the focus of the attention to date is something that you think is worth moving forward with. If, for example, you feel like the scoring system is too complicated or has some sort of fatal flaw in it, or our members of the public, illuminate something that you hadn't been thinking about, then it may not make sense to put a lot more thought into those kinds of logistical questions because, maybe we're not going to go there in the first place. That's a bit of the confusing part of this, is that instead of baking the whole pie so you could look at the whole pie, we baked like a little piece of it, which is the scoring system. We still need to bake the rest of how it would all fit together, the logistical piece. But it's a complicated piece of pastry. So we want to make sure that the scoring system makes sense to everyone before we go on and formalize the rest of it.
We could have a business come in that we really want, but they might have to wait a whole year.
So that was one of the issues that came up when the DRB talked about this at one of their meetings, and frankly, it was one of the issues I identified in a couple of the public documents that are informational documents. Yes, that's an issue. Currently, for subdivisions and most residential development, they're in the review process for a year plus anyway, because subdivision has an iterative sketch plan, preliminary, final plat review, and there are surveys required, and there's just tends to be more time and care and feeding of those kind of projects. So having an allocation scoring system that revolves around a once a year evaluation, to my mind, probably won't slow down subdivisions too much. But for new businesses that are just looking to locate on an existing approved lot and simply are coming in for a site plan review, it very much could delay them by a substantial period of time. They could come in and say, under today's rubric, they could come in and say, select board, I need this allocation, and then go to the DRB and say, I just got this allocation for my potential project, and approve my site plan, and in a matter of maybe 2 to 3 months, they have their approvals and their permits and they're off and running. This system would potentially slow that down, unless on the logistics side we incorporated something that's different from the Williston model, meaning perhaps we do these reviews more than once a year, or perhaps we provide non-residential allocation requests some different pathway. There could be ways to get around that, but that's definitely I think a possible flaw in this system.
Does Williston Select Board assign once a year the total?
Yes. Yep. So they get a report from their Public Works Department once a year on how much did we use last year, what is our actual capacity, and then the Williston Select Board says, okay, we're gonna put this much into the growth management pot for the DRB to allocate. We're gonna put this much into these other pots that the Public Works Department allocates without any review. And in the Williston model, it is only residential development that is part of this scoring system. Commercial and non-residential development do not go through their growth management once a year scoring process. They have a separate pot. They go to the Public Works Director and they just get it. There's no competitive process within the commercial non-residential side of Williston's model.
Did our subcommittees discuss doing that?
We did,
Here.
and I think the discussion revolved around wanting everyone to be on a level playing field, commercial development,
and
residential
residential
development, mixed-use development, and wanting sort of raise the bar and make the best possible projects for all development, not just the residential slice of it. And that's why the scoring system that the committee suggested that you refined deals with everything, not just residential. In Williston, their system is a growth management system. That's a part that I haven't really explained well. it was originally adopted when Williston was experiencing very rapid residential growth and development. And what they did was they said, we're going to look at a 10-year window, and we're going to limit the amount of development you can see each year within that 10-year window, so that we can sort of put the brakes on a little bit and get some control over this. And because the growth that was happening at the time was largely residential, their growth management system is entirely focused on that slice and not the business side, not the commercial side.
One thing that keeps coming to my mind, and I'd like to hear everyone else's opinion on this, and I mean, I've been working on this for, I don't know how long, over
Yeah,
almost
it's like
2 years.
2 years
maybe.
now.
Yeah. And something I keep thinking about is just like, you know, the need for this in Hinesburg right now, because, you know, obviously Williston, we're a lot different than Williston. And I'm just curious as to like how many projects we actually get every year and how much real competition that we have.
Yeah, I was explaining at one of your previous meetings that last year in Williston, they had, I think, 3 or 4 projects that were in their scoring system for their residential growth management. So, which didn't seem like a lot to me. Here in Hinesburg, you know, we're a much smaller community. In any given year, there are definitely multiple requests for allocation, but often they're small. So someone wants to put in an accessory apartment or do a minor development. The larger requests for allocation come in sporadically. So it's very, very likely that we could go a year and not have a large one. It's also possible, because of the development push happening right now, that we could have, you know, 3 sizable ones. And in fact, last year we did have 3 sizable ones. The Hinesburg Center Phase 2 project behind Kinney Drugs came in and got one. The Haystack Crossing project came in and got one, and Jan Blumstrom came in and got one, all in the same year, and sizable allocations. So it's a little hard to predict, but there definitely will be years I would predict in which we may not have any, or we may have one. So I think the competition piece of it is questionable.
Yeah.
Which is part of why I think the committee and the planning commission thought, you know, a minimum score would be a good thing, just to make sure that
So Jean, she can keep her allocations as long as she keeps paying for it every year.
3 years. So it's good for 3 years.
It's only good for 3?
Yep, and you can request to have that extended, and the select board in the past has granted extensions to that, but per the ordinance, it's good for 3 years.
Alex, a more detailed question. For example, in the housing category, the maximum score could be 15 points. And when you look at the housing needs attributes, for example, at least 50% of the new homes are perpetually affordable, you get 8 points. But then there's also bonus points, and you get 1 bonus point for every home that is perpetually affordable, that is meets the 50% of the area median income, the same criteria that you get 8 points for. So
It's not actually.
How does
so that's
that
a good
work?
question. We define what affordable housing is in the opening paragraph,
Right.
and that talks about it being affordable to someone making 80% of the median income for our area.
So the bonus points are for
For houses that would be
more-
affordable to somebody making 50%.
50%.
So it's more affordable, and that's why you
And that's why you
bonus
get
points.
more bonus points. So
Yeah.
you could get 8 bonus points on at least 50% of the houses are perpetually affordable.
Yep.
And you could get additional points if those housing units were even more affordable.
Yeah, so let's say you're doing 20 homes, and you say 10 of them, half, 50%, are going to be perpetually affordable. You get the 8 points. But let's say that it's a nonprofit housing developer who has additional resources, and they say, yeah, 10 of those homes, 50% are going to be affordable, but we're able to bring that affordability down to 50% of or 40% of median income, so they're affordable to people making even less money. They would get the 8 points and then additional bonus points on top of that. And
Just in
we
that category.
right, we did that intentionally to try to incentivize people to do as affordable as possible.
The newspaper articles that have just come out about affordable housing in Vermont in general, but specifically in Chittenden County, paint a very black picture about the ability to
Right.
build affordable housing.
It's difficult, and to get to these lower, to get to these more affordable percentages, so affordable to somebody making 60% of the median income or 30% of the median income, private housing developers just can't do
Can't do
that.
it.
That those projects happen when there's a nonprofit housing developer who is able to leverage grant and other sort of financing tools to make that happen.
Isn't there an example that we talked about specifically with that? Was it Green Street that was kind of in that situation?
Yeah, Green Street is comparable. I don't know to what extent Green Street actually promised that they would hit lower targets, even more affordable than the 80% number. But the way they did, yeah. So they would have been eligible for more points. And again, the idea in the system is that A, it's an incentive to achieve something that our town plan says is important, but B, it's a way to judge two different projects and say, well, these are both good projects, but this project got more points because it's providing even more affordable housing. Yeah. And similarly for senior housing and assisted living and the like.
So what does livable wage mean?
Right. So that is tied to.
It's in the paper this weekend. It said someone had to make $29 an hour in Chittenden County to afford to pay rent.
Yeah.
That's a lot different than 18.
So it is tied to the document that the draft references, which is something that the Vermont Legislative Joint Fiscal Office publishes each year, and it is divvied up by area of the state. They have a Chittenden County area because it's a lot more expensive to live around here than it is in more rural parts of the state. Yeah, I mean, the number that we're using is for a single person household, what they would need to pay for housing and basic expenses according to the report. So it's a good question, Dennis. To be honest with you, I'd have to look at the report again to know all the factors that they considered in figuring out why the livable wage was only $18.09 per hour, when the housing wage does get reported as being much larger than that. I'd have to take a second look at it. Yeah, it's possible that higher number is that way, but I'd have to take a look at it. I've seen it reported as well, and I can get back to you on that. This number of $18.09 an hour is actually higher than the one that the Joint Fiscal Office typically reports out. They report out what a two-person household would need to, what the living wage would be for that, for each person. And they also tend to report on the statewide number, not just Chittenden County. And so I think their report, the livable wage is 15 something an hour, or maybe even lower. So we selected one that, you know, is a little more real, but I'll get back to you on why it's different from the housing wage.
Well, Dan, I don't know if this connects to what your question was, but thinking about this, we may not even use it in the next 4 or 5 years, but I think it's great to have it in place, so at some point in our future, if it's needed, it's there. We don't have to scramble to come up with a system.
Yeah.
We likely won't use it in the next year and a half or so. It's possible that we could, but we don't have very much water allocation to give away right now. And I know Andrew Frost, who was on the Water and Wastewater Allocation Committee, was one member who said, you know, he helped make this, but he also said, this is a pretty complicated system. If we only have 2,000 gallons of water allocation to give away, I don't think we need this robust of a system to figure that out. And I agree with him. I think it only makes sense if this new well that we're trying to prove out does prove out, and then we have a substantial amount of capacity to give away. So the soonest that well could actually come online would probably be the end of 2021, because it has to test out this spring, and then if it does, the soonest it would probably go to the voters to allocate money to actually bring it online would be November, and then it would take at least a year to actually do the work. So we do have time to get this right, or at least keep working on it if that's the direction you want to go, even if there are a lot, you know, some questions that need to be fleshed out or what have you.
Where did essentially the desire for an allocation system come from, as opposed to staying with what we do
What we
now?
have today?
First come, first
Yeah.
serve, essentially.
I'm going to hang that entirely around Andrea Morganti's neck. She thought that this was when she was on the select board. She felt like this was a community resource, a limited one, that we weren't leveraging very well to implement the town plan. And I'm not going to say she thought up that idea, but she was the one who advocated for it. It's actually in the town plan. So the town plan that the Planning Commission worked on and the Select Board adopted in 2017 does talk about doing this, does talk about using our municipal water and wastewater allocation to help implement the goals of the town plan. Andrea just looked at that and said, let's do it.
How do you do that?
We're about ready to make these major improvements to our water and our wastewater system. And this is an opportune time while we're talking about that to work on those action items in the town plan. So anyways, Andrea made the suggestion, the select board felt it was a good idea and appointed this committee. And at the end of the committee's work, we presented the recommendations and the scoring system to the select board, and the board said, we're not sure about this, but we think it warrants further, efforts. And that's when they kicked it to you at the planning commission level to vet the scoring system and get public input before we go on with ordinance changes and a whole logistical framework to build around this scoring system.
We did receive input from one person, unless you've added more. Nancy
Yeah, maybe
Dunlap.
before you open it up to our public that are here,
Yeah.
we got I got one message from Nancy Dunlap, and her comment was that she found the system confusing, and she was wondering if it applied to everyone in town or just a certain section. And but anyways, her comment was, it's confusing. It seems overly complex, and is this going to keep businesses out by increasing costs even more? She said she could see the attorneys lining up. She thinks it really needs to be simplified. Beyond Nancy's comments, there was the minutes of the January 21st DRB meeting, so there's a whole bunch of discussion in there that you can read. And then Peter Erb, who was on the Water and Wastewater Allocation Committee with Dan and Carl and several other folks, just emailed me tonight to say he couldn't attend, but he would like to wholeheartedly, endorse the work that has gotten to this point and hopes that it can move forward. So that's all I've received to date.
Okay. So, since it is a hearing after all, and in theory we should be hearing from people in the audience, does anyone have any? Carl?
I'd make some comments. I'm Carl. I was on the committee with Dan, and just a couple of sort of the big picture. I think, John, you asked sort of why this was sort of recommended, and Alex and I had talked about it in terms of affordable housing, because we weren't getting any affordable housing in Hinesburg, and we went to the inclusionary zoning approach, which was getting us very little. And Williston was able to use their system to really encourage affordable housing. So we looked at this as maybe a way to increase our ability to get affordable housing as part of the projects. Way back when Alex was hoping people would include it, this was before even inclusionary zoning, nobody did. So he was striking out. So inclusionary zoning got a unit here, a unit there, because it's one for every 10. If I understand it right. So that was the Affordable Housing Committee's view, that this was a mechanism to really get something that our housing needs assessment has shown, 2 times, 10 years apart. And Hinesburg is different from Williston in the sense that we have a shortage of water and wastewater. And even if we get the well, that still is a finite amount of water, unless we want to keep trying to dig more wells. So it seemed important to look at these factors and see how we could put some priority and get projects that are even better. The thing that I heard tonight was economic development, and Dennis, I think this is important. Maybe there should be a way for a business to have a faster track, because it seems to be a little simpler of a project. So when you design that, there might be a way to have that not be, well, we could have had jobs in 4 months, the building started, but it's 12 months. So that might be something your staff could figure out. And the other thing, I don't know if Alex said it, but our committee felt whatever the scoring system is, the developers have to understand what the points are. So it's somewhat easy for them to say, oh, I can get 4 points for this. And we really thought projects that we went through and said, boy, they didn't get a lot of points, but if they had known they could put a trail in to get points, I think those projects, they would do that because it would help them get the allocation. And it wasn't like that would add a lot of cost. So some of those factors that get you bonus points or other points, that could happen in a project. So while you could have a project come in, they'd be the only one, and they don't get it because they're at 10. And these are low bars, the minimums. I think they can meet it. They could probably easily get up to 12 or the 20 because they'd see all they have to do. And there's a lot of options out there. It seems like a good amount of variety of ways to get regular points or bonus points. So other than the job, I think Dennis raised a good point. I think you do want to figure out a way that a business that wants, because clearly if Jan was able to get some businesses in that park, she's since withdrawn that, we don't want a system that would discourage that or slow it down in a sense that, because businesses have to make decisions pretty quick. Now they still have to build a building and everything, but they need to know what they want to do, and you don't want to have our system stymie that. And I think we can make a system so it's more than just once a year. The other thing is to make sure as the DRB feels comfortable scoring these, and I felt our committee was a pretty good representative committee, the select board, the housing, economic development, the DRB, the planning commission. And Sarah thought that DRB would be very comfortable doing that, and Dennis, you're on the DRB, I think, still too. So those are just some of the things to keep in mind, but I would encourage you to keep looking at the system and see if we can bake the rest of the pastry that, we're trying to bake and not have it be something, I don't think it has to be that complicated. And I think once developers know about it, they'll be able to do it. It just can't be a surprise. And if we're talking a year and a half, the major developers would know what the rules are. And it seems to work in Williston fine, and there's certainly no lack of development going on there. So I hope you'll keep the project moving forward.
The only thing I'm concerned about is if you have a development come in, they have no competition, you still might not get affordable housing. Right? What's the,
They can achieve their points in ways other than affordable housing, and this
I
is
mean,
an
I
a la
think you'd be
carte
better
system.
off a certain project, a certain size, they have to put in affordable housing.
And that's our inclusionary zoning piece, and there, we could, not as a part of this, we could talk about zoning changes to boost, the required percentage of affordable units through the inclusionary requirements. Like Carl said, it's pretty anemic now, 1 per 10 units. Burlington, has a higher percentage than we do.
And Williston does too?
Williston does not have inclusionary zoning at all.
I mean, you just see the units you see, you look, they want $1,700, $1,500 a unit for rent. I don't think that's affordable, is it? Is that
Yeah,
called affordable?
It depends on the number of bedrooms. My experience here in Hinesburg, which was surprising to me at the time. So several years ago, when Hinesburg Center was built, the Kinney Drugs development,
Yeah.
when the residential buildings were built, one of those had to be an inclusionary affordable unit. And so we worked with the developer to make sure that the rent he was going to charge was proper, and that the person he was going to rent to met the income eligibility test. And it was just one unit. Champlain Housing Trust was really helpful and, working with both of us on that to give us information. But it was I believe it was a 2-bedroom unit, and at that time, the affordable rent was $1,250. This was several years ago. At the time, the market rate units, I think 2-bedroom were renting in that complex for maybe $1,400 or $1,350. So it wasn't much different from the market rate. And part of that has to do with the fact that it has to be affordable to somebody making 80% of the county median. And Chittenden County's median income is so high that it leads to a higher rent than you might see, in other parts of the state. But it all depends on bedroom count and family size. There's a couple of factors that lead into what the rent could be. But to your question, yes, because this is 6 categories, a la carte system. If your interest is stormwater treatment and you want this system to incentivize projects to go above and beyond and do a better job of keeping our water clean, it's possible that no project will do that because they could get their points through affordable housing or through energy efficiency or through providing public infrastructure. It's providing flexibility, and therefore you don't know exactly what bonus you're going to get out of it. Just depends on what works for the developer.
The residential category includes sort of a monitoring activity, whether or not the rent actually does meet that 80% rule. And what if the rent changes after a year or two? Who monitors that? And you also have to monitor what the income of the renter, the person living there, is. Who monitors that?
Right. So that is my department that should be doing that, and we did that with that one inclusionary unit in the Hinesburg Center project. We haven't been keeping up with that. We don't have very many inclusionary units. That's one of 3. The Green Street project has 2 more. But what I want to be doing is annually, just once a year.
This is something
interviewing.
that then has to be perpetual.
Yep.
Also.
Yep.
They should send you the lease.
Yeah, it won't be difficult to just make the inquiry and find that out on an annual basis. It's good in that we don't have to do it for the Champlain Housing Trust, or at least I don't feel the need to do it with them because of the nature of their rent and the way their organization works. But yes, we should still be checking up on an annual basis, and as we get more projects that meet these tests, yeah, we would
There'll
need to
be
do
more.
that. So, for example, in the Black Rock project, the Haystack Crossing project, they went and got allocation from the select board, and we didn't have a whole lot to give, and there was a special category for, well, I think it's called special projects. In any case, they argued that they should be able to access that special category if they committed to a certain number of affordable units above and beyond, what they would have been required to do anyways through our inclusionary. And so, and they got it. The select board agreed. And so there's an agreement built into that allocation related to affordability, not unlike what's proposed here. And so, yes, my department will have to track that if that project ever gets built and goes forward.
Any more?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Carl said about including the commercial part into the whole thing. I think it stymies economic growth. So I think you're inadvertently doing it by keeping them all together.
Right.
So
You'd like to see them split out in some
would.
way.
Yeah.
The non-residential from the residential.
Right, you're trying to control the wastewater allocation, but inadvertently you're stymieing economic growth too. And how many towns do this system?
One, Williston.
And what do other towns do?
In our research on the committee,
Nobody else had to worry about it.
yeah, most towns either aren't bumping up against the end of their capacity, or
They just buy
frankly
more water.
aren't keeping very good track and therefore don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, or as Carl just mentioned, have an essentially unlimited supply. So Williston is actually in that boat when it comes to water. Their whole system is based on wastewater because they're connected to the Champlain Water District, and when they want more water, they just open up the valve more, right?
Yeah.
But they don't have a wastewater treatment facility. They co-own one in Essex Junction, and they have to buy capacity from Essex Junction, and so they manage that a little more tightly. So yeah, really, Williston is the only municipality in the state that we found that had a robust sort of sophisticated allocation system. The rest of them are pretty much what we have now, first come, first serve.
I think you mentioned some of them don't even know.
Yeah,
they have.
that's true too.
I'm Catherine Goldsmith. I'm not here for this issue, but I can say that I wrote to Alex about the town should have something this years ago. So I'm in favor. I think it's a way for the town to get the features and the type of development it wants. And I haven't read through the details, so I can't comment on those. But I know the committee has worked for months and months and worked really hard on it, and I appreciate that. So I can just say I certainly support the concept and think it's a good thing.
Can I add one other comment to follow up on Mike? One of the major issues stymieing economic development is the lack of affordable housing. I forget Chris's last name from Vermont Smoke and Cure, but several years ago he said the biggest problem is his employees can't find anything affordable. And I'm sure that's true, we heard that when we were trying to expand the police department. So economic development and housing to me go hand in hand. And that's not been the way it was, say, 15 years ago. But a lot of the nonprofits and a lot of the business groups do see affordable housing is really critical for getting the workforce that they need. And they're not commuting. They can have their workers right nearby. So that's another reason that affordable housing is pretty important.
Actually, can I kind of jump on there? I have a 2-unit apartment building, and I've rented to more than one employee from Vermont Smoke and Cure. And when I advertise a 2-bedroom apartment of about 850 square feet for $1,000 a month, I get more responses than I can answer. I'm talking like 70 or more. And they're not fancy. I consider it sort of private affordable housing because they're not fancy, but they're clean and they're safe. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a huge need. And for families, I mean, people, yeah.
That's why I'm saying these big projects shouldn't have a choice.
Right, your point about
They should
having an
have
à la
a certain
carte system that
percentage
allows
of
you to
affordable
not have
housing.
to address that issue is an interesting one.
Because they can still get away with not doing it.
Right, right. They could focus on some other need that this community feels is also important, like
Because
water
it might be
quality
cheaper
or
to do stormwater
energy
than it is
efficiency.
to.
Or easier.
Yeah,
Simpler.
could be, could be.
Actually, I have one more comment, I'm sorry, and I don't mean to cut you off. So just, I like what you're saying, Dennis, because one of the things I don't like about some of the big projects is how they segment housing. I don't like it in Burlington, I don't like it other places, where they're like, okay, this is where all the big houses are. And I would love to see zoning that said, you need to do affordable housing and you've gotta mix it right in. You can't like say, oh, well, those are the affordable units over there. And I would love to see that, because to me, that would replicate what we already have in the village, where a person who owns their home lives right next door to a person who's paying $800 a month for their apartment. Because I think that makes for a stronger community.
And that issue is not addressed at all in this allocation system.
No, it is partially addressed in our inclusionary zoning
Right.
requirements, but no, it's that sort of, that level of detail is not,
Is
is
not
not
in
covered in
here.
here.
Right.
So I will say that I had wanted to reach out to a different segment for public input, and I haven't had a chance to do that, and that is the development community. So I thought it would be good to get feedback, maybe unvarnished feedback, from developers that have actually done projects in Williston and have had to work within their scoring and growth management system. To see how it works for them and whether there have been issues that they, could tell us not to repeat or not to fall over again. So I'm happy to reach out to them. I bumped into one today, actually. Didn't have a chance to really grill him on it. So I can do that if, again, the commission decides this is something you want to continue working on.
Well, talking about next steps, is this, you talk about changes in ordinances once this is done. Does that mean the select board is going to be hammering out the
Yeah,
schedule
so-
and
So let me explain how, in the clean and easy way version of how this was going to work. You were going to refine this scoring system, which would constitute a zoning regulation change, a new chapter in the zoning regulations. You were then going to forward it to the select board like you do all of your zoning regulation changes, and then it would be in their lap to hold a public hearing and adopt it as part of zoning. And they would wait to do that until they had done the work of the surrounding ordinance and changes to define logistically how this scoring system would work, in terms of the annual process and several of the other questions. So that was my vision for it, and the one I explained to the select board, actually, that your process would come first. You would get public input, because the committee that Carl and Dan were part of was a great committee, very diverse membership, but there was no public sort of outreach. So the community didn't really know what was going on. This is the community's opportunity to know what's going on. And that you would then put the whole package in the select board's lap, and they would have to do a whole lot of work. But you would have at least done this piece of it, and they would focus on the ordinance changes that would wrap around this. That's the clean and easy version. If you feel like this is worth pursuing, but needs substantial tweaks and revisions, then, you know, we probably need to make those before it gets shipped to the select board, which means, you know, more time, maybe another hearing at a later date, and then forwarding it to the select board when it's mature.
That special subcommittee is gone now, right?
Correct,
The
it
one
was
that-
a limited duration committee. They're all
so
still
we
in town
can't
though.
ask them to
And we know where they
weigh
live.
in on that, right?
We could, because clearly the
Make
planning commission as a whole, you have several other projects you're working
Yeah.
on, and
Yeah.
to do more of a deep dive into this might be difficult. So, you know, we could lean on those folks to come back to the table and help us rethink pieces of this if you think there's flaws that need to be addressed.
Well, I think what Dennis has brought up, what Mike was supporting, I think that's worth looking at. Separating out the business, the projects that develop jobs and bring business to the town from residential. And yet I understand exactly what Carl's saying, they're connected. Absolutely, housing and jobs are connected. But I'd like more people than just us and the little bit of community input we've gotten from this hearing to weigh in on, do we need a separate connected system for those two type of projects?
Are other commissioners of a similar mind to John on that front? Keep pressing forward, but make, you know, try to address that particular sticky wicket.
Yeah, I guess the points that were brought up tonight were two points I don't feel like we had really discussed it or, you know, identified as potential results, I guess, of implementing the allocation system. And to me, I feel like those are two things that I'd like to learn more about. I mean, how would this, you know, impact economic development coming in, or the timing of it anyway? Because I know, like, we have the 1 year review. Well, you know, maybe we need to make that a different process.
But is that a planning commission piece? Or is that, because I'm almost feeling like that isn't really,
Our job.
Yeah, it's a good
Maybe
point,
like-
Maggie. I think that I don't always like to tell you how I think because I don't want you to have the discussion, but I will tell you on this one. I'm really concerned about that issue, the business issue, and I remember at the committee level there was really this desire to, like, all development has a, you know, same playing field. Everybody competes, whether you're a business or a residential development. At the time, I thought, well, that makes sense, but I think that it is a planning commission issue if you feel like the scoring system needs to be changed and that businesses maybe aren't in it anymore. So if it's just a matter of reviewing this more frequently, like twice or three times a year, so that we don't run into the timing issue maybe for businesses, then maybe that isn't something that you need to flesh out because that's more of a logistical ordinance issue. But I think it's possible that the solution is mirror the Williston process a little bit more directly, which is take businesses right out of this scoring system and have this scoring system be for residential development only. And that's the system that Williston has. That's the only system that we have to look at for a model. And frankly, in Hinesburg, the vast majority of the development that we see and expect to see in the future is residential. You know, this is a place where people want to live, and businesses come infrequently. Like every so often we get something amazing like an expansion to NRG, or the animal hospital expands, or we get a Kinney Drugs. That doesn't happen with the regularity that we have people wanting to build houses, because this is a very desirable place to live.
so a development like Black Rock that has, you know, a phase one that includes, well, I think phase one is primarily residential, but
It's both. No, it's
but
both.
that is both.
Yeah.
But so, you know, Dearby would just not even look at the commercial, would just look at the look at the residential piece of that?
It's
I
a
mean,
really good question. I don't know exactly. I would like to talk more with my Williston counterpart to see how they've done it in mixed use developments. My sense is that they have two different pathways, and that the pathway for non-residential allocation is much shorter and easier, and the one for residential is much longer and more refined.
I mean, we could just have a minimum for. I guess I'm concerned that we're going to get. I don't know where we're going to schedule this. How we're going to schedule this with everything that we have on our plate.
I think we need a subcommittee. I think like we did with the contractor's yard issue, we need to split off a couple of planning commissioners who want to help bird dog this further.
But we also need to include someone from planning and zoning and somebody maybe from DRB.
Yeah, I mean, we could figure that out, but I agree. I think that given what you have on your docket, it's gonna be hard for the full commission to figure this out, at every meeting that comes
We
up.
just keep going over the same old, yeah.
Yeah. I will say that just from the standpoint of extracting, allocation for non-residential uses from this system, what's difficult in development review oftentimes, and the Haystack project and the Hinesburg Center project are good examples, is that these developers, because we have such strong residential demand, have a very good idea of what they're going to build on the residential side. And so the specifics of whether it's going to be affordable or whether it's going to be a single family home or a multifamily dwelling or a senior housing project, those specifics tend to flow very early in the development project. And so doing a conceptual level review and being able to score a project on those, on the residential side is easier. Dennis, one of your concerns you raised with this system was like, are we going to have enough information at the conceptual level review to actually be able to score these projects? Like, are they going to know what their stormwater treatment system is going to do and whether they're going to have X number of jobs at the concept level? And what I'm saying is, on the residentially speaking, I think oftentimes there is that specificity, and almost never is that specificity for non-residential uses. Like Kinney Drugs was the one example I can think of where the developer came in and said, I want to build a new building and I have a tenant and here's who it's going to be. But in the Haystack Crossing project that we're reviewing now in Hinesburg Center, I don't think they have a single tenant for the non-residential spaces that they are planning. And so they won't be able to get allocation or compete for allocation in the same way that they will for the residential side. So maybe separating them the way Williston does could be easier.
Well, and more realistic, maybe.
Perhaps. Yeah.
In terms of the whole environment of economic development and developers, processes.
As long as the select board is savvy enough to withhold enough allocation for non-residential development such that residential projects don't soak up all that's there and there's nothing left for a year later when the coffee shop wants to open or Green Mountain Solar wants to, expand their facility or what have you. But I think we can manage that. We do today with our current system. It's first come, first served, but we do have pots of non-residential and residential.
So it seems like this scoring system would be a valuable tool for the select board to have, regardless. And the planning commission putting in the time to decide these are the things that are valuable to our town. Taking, as we're building this system, it seems like maybe the question is, is it worthwhile the time to put the time into it? Is that correct? Like, do we want to devote the time to this if the select board, maybe it's an option, they use it to decide, well, which of these we have a limited allocation, which of these should we allow?
It's partly that, Denver, and it's also partly a recognition that just like this board has limited time to do deep dives on things, the select board has even less. Their charge is so broad that it's generally not helpful to give them a half-baked idea and say, well, split it up, figure it out. It's better to give them a fully baked idea and say, here's something to implement. You can, nibble around the edges. So I agree with you. We could hand this to the select board and say, maybe you want to take the non-residential criteria and use that for use that in a different way and keep these other ones for the residential slice. I think it would be good if we gave it to them with some structure behind that recommendation so that they had a place to move forward and didn't just spin their wheels.
Okay.
But because there's so much interplay between this zoning change with the scoring system and all the surrounding ordinance changes, there is necessarily going to be a lot of work at the select board level. So I would imagine when they get it, they're going to assign it to the town administrator and the utilities director and me and say, make it so, somehow.
So, for our part, we could do a 3-member committee. What do committee members think about this? To fast track some changes.
3 members from our committee?
Yeah, I mean, we could open it up again as the select board committee had.
Oh yeah, regardless of whether, I think it's fine to have a planning commission subcommittee. I would definitely extend the invitation to that other previous water and wastewater committee and say, hey, your proposal ran into some static and the planning commission, is thinking of maybe breaking it apart or revising it in some way. Come help us. Some of them might.
Yeah, but with the goal of coming back to us with a...
Right. With this particular issue, the one about
Right.
Non-residential business
Yeah.
sort of allocation addressed.
Carl, do you have any sense as to the rest of the committee, or you, and also, you think some of those members would like to join us, maybe a couple of them?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I
Not,
would think
not
so.
you.
Yeah.
We want to keep you here, but,
I mean, I could say I saw one of them on the golf course this past summer, and they asked me about it, so they were still interested.
yeah, okay.
Well, and Peter Erb just emailed me tonight with his support,
said
and
his
he was on
support.
the committee, so I could email him right now and say, Peter, it's on life support. We need you.
Carl, how about you?
I think that the basic decision is whether, I don't support jettisoning the economic development completely. I just think it needs to be decided on a more frequent basis. Because not all, just like all housing isn't the same, all job creation projects aren't the same.
Aren't the same.
So the criteria, and we had the economic development committee as part of it, seems still important, and a project like that can do other things to get the points. But I would defer to staff, because I don't know all the ins and outs on how you could keep a scoring system for economic development, but not slow down the pace at which they'd like to get things clarified with the town. And I don't think you have to scrap it completely. If the select board is taking some allocation for residential and some for non-residential, there's a pot of money there, and that pot of money can be handled a little bit differently. But I would defer to Alex and staff whether that's reasonable or not. But would I be willing? Yes, I would be willing to work with whoever to see how to tweak this to not have it look like a barrier to a business that wants to come in. And I don't know everyone, but I think if others are around that were on it, they would too, and you might not need everybody. And Dan could represent your committee, because there was a planning commission member.
That's pretty much all we've done since he's been on the planning commission is appoint him to subcommittees, so.
Why not one more?
Why not?
That is an option, for the contractors yard subcommittee, there were there were 4 of you, now there's 3 of you, and 1 past planning commission member. There's nothing to say that it can't simply be Dan from the planning commission with the help of his former committee members and myself, to try to, come up with a solution and bring it back to you in a month or 2.
And it doesn't have to be Dan.
Yeah, I'd be interested in, like you had mentioned, talking with, I guess, some developers, someone that might be able to give us a little bit more insight on, how the system would impact some of the issues that we have been talking about. Maybe they have some more insight as to, the timing aspect of it, and if it really is a big issue, or if it's not, if it doesn't slow things down, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just be honest with you. Recently, our office has been talking with a local business who's looking to expand, and it was those conversations and the speed at which they would like to make some decisions on that front, and it was that project that gave me pause. I'm like, wait a minute, like.
Yeah.
If that's happening and we have this system and they have to wait until March of next year to get an answer on allocation, they're probably not going to do the project because business decisions just don't wait that long. And
We don't want that to happen.
and we do not want that to happen. No, this particular business is a very beneficial one in town. We would like to see it grow and stay here. So. Yeah, I think it would be good to get some feedback from folks on that front. Go ahead, Denver. The way it works is Maggie's running the meeting, but people just talk.
Okay. So Dennis said, if there's a place that we really want, and if we do a good job with this scoring system, the points are gonna tell us that. So like some place that we really want is gonna have a high score. So we could build the system such that, well, maybe there's a threshold that says you don't have to wait until the next allocation. The select board can give you the go-ahead now. We really want this to happen. It has
It's actually gonna
X,
be the DRB.
X number of points.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
at which point this is beneficial to the town. It's above this threshold. Fast track.
Yeah, so we actually talked about that at the committee level prior to coming to the planning commission, because Williston didn't have that, and just in the last year they've updated their growth management system and they added that as a feature. I forget what the term that the planner called it. It wasn't platinum projects, but it was something like that. That if you had a very high score, you just automatically got your allocation. You didn't have to go through the competitive process because it's just such a good project. And at the time, we said, well, this is new in Hinesburg. Maybe we just need everybody to, flesh themselves out and compete. But maybe that's an idea. Maybe it's one way to tackle it. The question, of course, becomes who does the scoring, and can it happen on the fly? I guess it would have to. So, yeah. But maybe that's a way to do it. And then you don't lose the scoring part of it in the process of providing a fast track opportunity. You still have projects that want to shine, show that through the scoring system.
Could you task the person submitting with, here, submit your score? Tally it up yourself.
Yeah, the way the Williston model works, which I think we would implement here, is that the applicant, does their best to explain why they think they should score high, and then staff provides, a more objective assessment and a suggested score, and then ultimately it's the development review board that determines what the score is. But it's all done in the bright light of day and with a public hearing and all the rest of that, so applicants can make their case and all of that. Yep.
I think you need to spend a little time talking about the businesses you're talking about. I mean, you're talking about a pretty large business, or I'm thinking it's more of a service industry business. And those are really two different types of businesses.
Right, like the difference between
A bakery and a smoking cure.
right, or a hair salon and a NRG or something like that.
Yeah, so I think there's a big difference, because, you know, when I'm thinking of taking the commercial part out of it, I'm thinking about providing services to people in the town so they don't have to travel to get those services, not a big energy thing, so.
Yeah, and the system that, as it was discussed, did contemplate or anticipate an opt-out level, so that if the allocation you needed was small enough, you wouldn't go through this system. You would just go ahead and get it. And it just depends on the nature of the business as to whether that would be the case. A hair salon might use a fair amount of water and might not meet that test, even though it's a small business. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, there is a substantive difference between small service-related businesses and larger manufacturing concerns.
In general, don't the businesses use less than residential though? I mean,
Yeah.
because of the showers and the flushing and the, you know.
Unless you're a brewery.
Yeah, unless you're a
Yeah,
brewery
it might be a-
or a restaurant or a laundromat. Typically, businesses are required to get allocation for 15 gallons per day per employee. Whereas a single-family home is, on the water side, is somewhere in the 350 gallons per day range. So you can actually have a lot of employees, you know, at an office setting and have less usage than a single family home.
Right, so they would fit under that small project exemption under 1,000 gallons.
That was the hope, is that a lot of the smaller businesses, or even a smaller residential addition like an accessory apartment or a single or a 2-unit subdivision, wouldn't go through this system. They would have a way to get an opt-out. But even with those larger businesses, Mike, there's still that question of, like, how do we ensure that they get an answer in a reasonable time frame such that they can move forward in this town and not decide to just move up the road to Williston.
Yeah, I wondered the same thing when you were talking about you called it, I call it sketch plan, you call it the initial.
Conceptual.
Yeah, I call it sketch, okay. Yeah, and how that worked in terms of,
Yeah, that is the other awkward part about
investment.
having the same process for residential subdivisions and non-residential uses. Currently, like I was saying, residential subdivisions have this multi-step process with a sketch plan review, and it kind of lends itself to what the Williston model is and what we've proposed. But new businesses, unless they need to create a lot to exist on, oftentimes don't, and so their review is much abbreviated, and there is no conceptual level phase in our regs right now. They actually come in with a full application, everything tied together, and it gets reviewed. And this process would anticipate creating a new conceptual level review for such projects, which again adds time and hassle.
All right, so, moving on, we have vague notions of setting up a committee. And, I wonder if we should just boot that discussion to our next meeting, or,
That decision?
If Dan's willing, I think he's the logical planning commissioner, since he was on the committee with Carl originally, to sort of be the planning commission link with my help.
it would make sense that folks who are most familiar, how's your schedule?
I'd be happy to do it.
I mean, I think we just have one more of the subcommittee.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as long as, you know, I'm not doing
Contractors-
both
the
subcommittees.
Contractors
Yeah.
and subcommittee is almost done.
Yeah.
So
Next.
we won't have to do triple duty
Yeah.
too much.
Well, yeah, I mean, other than that, I'd be happy to do it.
That'd be great.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm willing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So why don't we do
Alright.
this? Since Dan is willing, I will reach out to the former Water Wastewater Allocation Committee folks and say we need to reconvene for a brief period of time to answer a few questions and talk about a few issues that came up at the Planning Commission hearing. Can you help us? And we'll see how many of them are willing to come back for a couple meetings to see if we can't thrash this about.
Beautiful. All right. Fantastic. So thanks, Mom. So close the hearing.
Yeah, you have
I
two
don't think there's an
options.
action item.
I have two options. You can close the hearing with the understanding that you will be warning another one when you have a firmed up proposal that's maybe a little different. Or you could actually continue the hearing to another meeting and pick it up from there. But I think it probably makes more sense just to
Let's
do,
just
do
close
this
it on
all
this.
over again once
Yeah.
the proposal.
We'll have a
is
new
refined.
document
Yeah.
then. So we'll close the hearing. And thank you for the discussion. And I goofed at the beginning of the meeting. I forgot to welcome Denver Wilson as our new planning commission member. So welcome.
Nice to meet
And
you all.
yeah.
We're missing Ralph Keelman and Marie Gardner. So there are two faces that you're not seeing tonight that you probably will at future meetings. But did you get everybody's name? Not that you remember. You don't have to remember everybody's name. Did
I wrote
everybody?
them down.
Okay.
James came in a little bit late, so this
Hey,
is
James,
James
I'm Denver.
Donegan.
I didn't catch your name.
Barbara 4 Hour.
Barbara, nice to meet you. I'm Denver.
We need signs.
That could happen. That could
We
happen.
should have a little craft hour and do our own signs.
Yeah, so feel lucky because Denver did not actually apply for the planning commission position. Denver and a fellow, Brandon Martin, applied for the alternate DRB position. And when the select board interviewed both of them, it was just last week, right?
Yeah.
They indicated there's only one slot to fill, and they asked both Denver and Brandon if they were interested in the planning commission, and both of them said yes. In fact, I think Brandon said he'd prefer to be on this commission, but then he said, I can't make
Wednesdays,
Wednesday
yeah.
meetings. So Denver was nice enough to, be willing to take this slot. And
I was glad Brandon bowed out of this one because this one appealed to me more too. So.
all right.
Oh, good, good.
And I will say
Great.
that there was someone else who contacted me, and he and I hadn't been able to touch base until after last week's meeting when the appointment was made. And he is also interested in joining the planning commission. Was a little bummed that he missed the opportunity. So just know that there's one more person out there that probably would like to join you at some point when there's a vacancy.
Maybe he's interested in being on a committee, subcommittee.
Good idea. we're all about subcommittees now, so
Good thinking.
add them to the allocation one.
Yeah, we have fun here. We get to look at maps. And sometimes we have cookies. Okay, so let's move on to architectural and streetscape design standards, continuing our discussion from 2 weeks
Right.
ago.
So let me put it up on screen so people can see it. At your last meeting, there were two of the, I think, 11 categories of design standards that you wanted to see language on. Two of them I had fleshed out a bit with Maggie's help, and I think we only made it through the first one.
Yep.
So tonight we can talk about the second one, which we were referring to as permeability, which I imagine doesn't mean a whole lot to the average person who wasn't part of our conversations. Basically, the idea of design standards that will help people see what's going on in a property and to have sort of aesthetically pleasing streetscapes that sort of engage and enliven what's happening there, as opposed to closing everything off from the street. So I'll put it up here. Find it. While I'm doing that, did anybody read that section. So it's permeability. The next category was rear and side yard parking standards, which we had talked about maybe being okay the way they are drafted now, and I looked at them further and I thought they were, so I didn't propose any changes to those. It's always easy when you don't have to do anything, write anything new. And then the next one was street grid and connectivity, and there is a little bit of language on that category. So any thoughts on the permeability category or the street grid from what you read?
From our minutes from our last meeting, which was quite a while ago, we did talk about permeability.
There was some discussion about that, and in this new draft that I provided to you, I tried to make the changes based on that discussion at the last meeting, with the
Okay.
understanding that part of those changes are going to be street types, like an A, B, C, D type of street, and that's described a little bit, but I think we're going to need our artists to sketch those, to flesh those out some more for you. But I didn't want to go backwards and retread that conversation. I just wanted to show you the changes, because you jettisoned some of my suggestions last time, so those are now gone from the draft. But what I wanted you to look at was the next one, which was permeability, which
Permeability.
may have some overlap with
I
that.
just had was it our last discussion, you mentioned, up in Williston, the new healthy living, I think? Am I
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And where it wasn't built with the pedestrians in mind, like where the pedestrians are actually gonna, I haven't seen it yet, so
Yes, I think it's still under construction.
I think there's just metal studs.
Yeah, I don't think there's much there yet.
It's
But-
very permeable.
The issue that was discussed during this sidewalk tour that was happening was that the consultant who had been brought in to sort of tell Williston what they did well and what they didn't do so well said that if your standards and your design standards require the building to sort of present itself to a street so that it's, visible and inviting and all of that, and your lot or your structure fronts on two streets, be really careful about which street you tell it has to present itself to, because in that case, the building is sort of designed to present itself to Route 2, and all the people who are going to be walking to that store from the Finney Crossing neighborhood are not going to be walking on Route 2. They're going to be walking from that side street from their neighborhood towards the store, and what they're going to walk into is a parking lot. Instead of a nice storefront and a pathway that gets them to the door and all of that jazz.
So they got an F on Route 2?
They got Route 2 is going to look great, but they got an F on that interior street. And the guy said, if you want to encourage people walking, you blew it on this one. Or it can,
Don't all fronts of the buildings front on Route 2? As far as I know.
There's the gas-
Chili's,
Well, yeah, but there's.
No, that's
setbacks that follow
2A.
that.
2A, I mean.
I'm talking about Route 2. So
Right on.
across from Shaw's on
So they
Route.
got an F on 2A.
Well, these comments were related to Route 2. We didn't. He didn't actually give them a grade on the Chili's and the Longhorn and all of that stuff.
So just getting back to this,
Yeah.
I just wanted, because under entryways, porches, all of that, we just have facing the street, and I wonder how we can, when such structures face multiple streets, they may have prominent entryways facing just one street. Is it enough to say, because we don't really have a place to, how do we avoid that same error?
Face both streets.
Yeah.
Maybe of a
Respond to
certain,
both streets.
maybe of a certain, if the facade is of a certain length, it should face.
Well, Kinney Drug, when you think of it, they face 116.
And then the
parking
pedestrian,
lot, and
yeah.
it's the same kind of entrance from both sides. It's a sliding door.
Mhm.
And we have already regulations that ask for parking to not be on the front side of the lot, but instead be on the rear side of the lot. And that's where people approach the building from then. If you think of the new healthy living or not healthy living, the co-op in not in South Burlington, but the one in the southern part of Burlington, there's no response to the street that it's on. You drive in to behind the building, and there's the parking lot, and you enter the building there, and there's not much response there to seeing in the building. The only place you see on the building is that side street, which is all still gravel, and there are doors that go in there, but it's the cafeteria area. It's the area where if you get something to eat, you can sit down in there. That's what you see into. So it's a curious requirement to have permeable fronts on the street, but most people who come to the store are coming from the other side of the building,
Yeah,
from the parking lot.
I think it's less about the customer experience and more about the public experience. You know, the experience of people walking down the street, experiencing the neighborhood. And the idea is, like our field trip to Virgins, you want buildings designed such that people walking down the street feel like they're invited into it and that they're excited about what's going on there, which when you have, a blank facade with all opaque windows or no windows, it's not permeable. You can't see into it. You don't know what's happening there. But if you have display windows that are clear, and you have either art or landscaping or other things that sort of soften the appearance or give you the impression that you could maybe stop and have a seat and, chat with someone, then it becomes a more permeable sort of streetscape.
Sure.
And so I wouldn't worry so much about, the Kinney Drugs customer who drives around in parks and what do they see? I would worry more about the person who's going to walk someday from their apartment above the Parkside Cafe up to, the fourth brewery we have in town. Once we're a brewery mecca, and they're going to walk north on 116 past Kinney Drugs and over Patrick Brook, and what's that experience like? Because if we want people to walk, the streetscape has to be permeable, has to be inviting, it has to feel like a place and not just a wall. And I apologize, I cannot seem to get my computer to display on the projector, so I'm working on it. But
Well, I keep thinking about the presentation that Rolf made with his ideas for 116, and one of them, the buildings were tight up against each other, and the other one, there was a gap, to me, a permeable gap between them. And I found that one much more appealing.
Right.
So again, that's.
Yeah, especially if there's parking in the back, access, so you don't have to walk around the entire monolithic building. Yeah.
so what's proposed in this draft under the permeability category has to do with the front facades, windows specifically, entryways, porches, and setbacks for garages, which is something we have in our regs today, and it's just fleshed out a little differently in this version. yeah, Maggie, there is that question of do we need to differentiate between a primary and a secondary street for structures that are on a corner that front on multiple streets? Thanks, Emilio. But it might be easier to have the conversation without that issue at first. Like think about a building that just, a traditional setting. It fronts on a single street and you walk by it. What do you want for design standards to make sure that it feels inviting in that? And do these design standards for road facing windows and entryways and garages and porches fit the bill? And now I'll try to make this fit the screen so you can see it. It's a little small.
With the the windows section,
Uh-huh.
it says solid or blank walls must not exceed 20 feet in length on road-facing facades, principal structures. Where did the 20 feet number come from?
I probably, after much thought and analysis, I probably just stole that from Brattleboro, or
Yeah, because I think they have
Yeah.
to put this under their
yeah,
regs.
yeah. We're talking shameless plagiarism, basically. A lot of this.
Well, and so that's a good point. It's always
Repurposing.
it's always a good idea to look at other communities' regulations. It's never a good idea to just copy without thinking about it. So it is a good idea to think about whether 20 feet, a 20-foot length of blank wall is, the right distance, or in our town, if it ought to be more or less than that. I think.
I mean, there was some thought.
Right, but I mean, for the rest of you to just sort of think about a typical building and what that would look like.
Right, and
in
also
terms of window spacing.
in Hinesburg, which is smaller, we tend to have smaller buildings, and how long is too long? If you're walking alongside a large building, how far is too far to walk before there's any window or entryway? Just solid wall.
Maybe it's a percentage. You don't want to only walk by wall. There should be a window or a sign. Or
Right.
something.
Right.
So is that wall over there about 20 feet?
I think we
Yes.
should start bringing tape measures to.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
I'll
Look at
grab
the
one.
ceiling. Those are 2-foot grids. 2,
4,
4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16,
Yeah, it's about 20.
18. So if you go from this light to that inset wall, that's 20 feet. So the inset is not quite 20 feet. It's more like 18 and a half feet or something. You walk past that wall and you don't get to an opening to that door or to that door, for example. Is that too far?
It seems pretty far.
Seems pretty far
When
to
I'm
me.
thinking of Lampman's or Kinney's or this building or the house next door,
In
none
our
of them,
small.
none of them have walls with that
Yeah.
Yeah,
wide
I think
without a window or a
without a
door.
window
Yeah.
or a
I would
door.
think of Kinney's. I mean,
Yeah, so when you look at them from the front, actually we could probably do that with Google's help.
'cause I know you have like the entrance that you enter. I think
And then they have phony windows essentially that are just, they're glass, but they're covered.
Right, but if you
And Lampman's did the same thing. They used to have windows that you could see into the building, and now they have displays against those windows.
So maybe like Nestec would be one.
yeah. So they have.
So
those
here's
windows
Kenny's
there.
in the Google Street View, which is a
Okay.
little hard to see with these lights. Emilio, I'm gonna kill the front bank of lights. Sorry about that.
do those high windows, for example, if those looked into the building, which here they actually don't, would those count as
Which high windows
Well,
do
let's-
the ones that are on the right-hand side with the little sloping glass?
All right.
those do look into the building.
I know, but they're so high. I mean, somebody walking past,
right.
what I'm
So-
seeing is the ceiling of the building.
Okay, are we on
Of the room
are we on
inside.
windows or entryways?
Windows.
Windows.
We're
okay.
still in that 20
All right.
feet of
A
blank wall
20-foot
space.
blank wall.
You wanted to look at Nestec, Maggie?
Well, I was just trying to think of buildings that have long facades.
Well, just move over to the creeks, to the park side. That's a long surface. And it does have windows that look inside.
And trees,
Yeah.
things that break.
Yeah.
Landscaping close to the
Yeah, yeah,
building
yeah.
and trees on the other side of the side.
So, yeah, I'm trying to think if Nestec actually
about
has
at,
windows
like-
or not.
Like down at Giro's, the metal
Oh,
shop.
that's creepy to walk by.
Well, there you're walking,
Yeah, but it's different
On this-
between this business and Kinney's.
Well, yeah, that's what I.
Tables sitting there looking out the window. The other place, they need shelving to put all the product
Well,
on.
yeah,
and
that's,
that's why they
that's what I
don't.
was getting at.
Right.
It's
Like
like,
you can have
yeah.
a window down low, but you're gonna look at shelving.
right,
and like they have a bunch of coolers along that wall
Right.
right,
too.
right.
That's why the windows are up high.
Because like,
Well, there's reasons for that. There's reasons for the windows being high, but does that meet our standard that we're talking about of being able to see into the building? No,
And
not
that's
really.
that's actually a really good question because Kinney's is a building that's here and is easy to observe. The whole point of this exercise is to come up with standards so that the community can be better assured that new development will have the look and the function and the feel that will make them proud to have it in Hinesburg, even if maybe they're worried that there's more of development, but at least they have some better comfort that the regulations are specific. So is Kinney's, I guess what I'm asking is Kinney's something to avoid, or is it fine? You know, did they do a decent enough job, even though the windows are opaque in certain sections and some of them are high? Is it still, you know, something that community members are like, yeah, I'm happy that's here. That building design is okay. Because I mean, I can see the desire to have tighter design standards, but if our current development, you know, doesn't meet the ones that we're drafting and we're okay with that current development, then maybe we're going further than we need to go.
Well, it seems pretty clear to me, Alex, if you look at the front of the Parkside Cafe, it's very different than this building, to my eye.
Sure.
It's much more permeable. You can see the activity in the building, you can see people sitting at tables in the building, inside. Here you don't get any of that.
Yeah, I mean there's
And there's
a bit of a
reasons that they have their displays on that wall and so forth. I mean, you can see it happen over time in Lampman's. Used to be permeable, now it's not.
Right.
So if we want permeability, I think we need to point to examples, the best examples that already exist as that's what we want.
Right. I just want there to be consensus that this is not what you want. That Kinney's, for example, is not. And I'm hearing you, John, saying, yes, this is deficient. It would be nice to have it more a more active part of the streetscape, more permeable. But I want to make sure everybody's on that same wavelength before we go too far down the design standard, this particular design standard.
I mean, they do have a, what would you call it, a portico area that's helpful. I mean, it adds dimension to the front of the building,
Definitely.
and it's certainly more inviting than just a blank wall would be.
I mean, would it be as bad if, you know, maybe they had some trees below those windows or something?
some vegetation
Yeah,
along there,
yeah.
some shrubbery, some flowers, rather
that's
than
true.
just grass.
In this area here,
Yeah.
Dan?
Yeah, that would help, but that's not permeability. I agree, that would help.
So if they had windows that were bigger, but aren't really windows, would that, well, it's not permeable, but aesthetically it might balance it.
It's interesting that under that arched area, there are fake windows that aren't clear, and yet in front of them on the outside, they put stuff. You
Yeah.
can see it right there.
Yeah.
It's
So
always
even
fun.
on the outside, at that location, for that example, they blocked the permeability on both sides.
Although you might argue that the merchandise that they are placing outside is, part of the aesthetic, right? Kind of like Obashan Hardware puts a ton of
theirs.
stuff out underneath the parapet, and it's part of the shopping experience to go there and sort of look at the
Right,
lawnmowers
so
as you walk in.
You're seeing the activity on the outside of the wall rather
Yeah,
than
in the same
what's
way you would
inside
see
the
a
wall.
restaurant have outdoor seating, a retail establishment might have outdoor merchandise display. Is that what we want? That's your call to make, but
Well, I think it's clear in here that road facing windows shall offer views into the building.
Right.
Minimize mirrored, severely tinted windows blocked by interior
Or
exterior.
exterior.
Thank you. Or
displays,
exterior
yeah.
displays. Because I really dislike the blocked windows. Although I'm wondering, I can't remember if above the blocked windows, do those squarish areas, do those actually offer views into the?
of the ceiling, like
Yeah.
John
Of the
said.
ceiling, they do, yeah.
They do look into the building, but you're looking at the ceiling.
Because then that would get around this.
Well, and it does beg the
Because
question.
it does
what
offer
if-
views into the building, even though the majority of the window is blocked.
Well, it does beg the question too of what, is it okay to have a blend of clear windows and opaque windows? Or is the design standard as written meant to imply you may have no opaque windows, they must all be clear, providing visual, the ability to see into the building?
If we just say into the building, then we can get high windows that
Sure.
you look at the ceiling.
Yeah.
So we have to say, you want to see into the activities of the building, the products that they're selling in the building. That's what you want to see, not
Yeah.
just the ceiling.
The problem, I think, is that, as Dennis mentioned, in a retail setting, you need that shelf space, so it can be hard. But also, in different types of uses, if we zoom down 116, well, I guess this is a fairly good example. This is the EFG building, the old police station, right? So it's not a retail building, it's not a restaurant, it's an office space. But they still do manage to have windows and a portico, and I guess you can see into the building. It's not as if the passerby is necessarily going to be gawking, though, at the people who are working in the office space. Like, I must see what they're doing at their computer. And similarly, the police station has windows that are consistently not, you can't see through them because they have blinds that they keep closed all the time. And it's a police station, maybe that makes some sense. But if we go down here, you wanted to look at the Giroux building. So these are the two Giroux buildings.
So lovely.
Technically, they have windows in the garage doors that you can see through.
There's spaces between the buildings.
Often the garage doors are wide open.
Correct.
Well, for
Yeah,
heaven's
they-
sake, let's go back and look at the police station.
They-
I mean, it's,
They have changed
I mean, the fire
facade
station.
of their building.
so,
Right. Yeah, they are
It's
the
the
same,
it's
same
the
as
same
the Giroux
thing, yeah.
building in that sense.
Well,
And
I
then
do
there's
actually,
the water
yeah.
and wastewater pump station facility, which has 0 windows and.
And we'd all like to look inside there,
Well,
for
actually,
sure.
if
See what those
there,
guys
there
are doing.
could be windows right on that road facing side, because that's the office side of that building. They do have like a little lab and office space there. I don't know why windows were never placed there, but you could have windows there.
Cheaper.
Security.
Maybe, yeah, well, maybe both. I guess what I was also thinking was the building 2 doors down from where we are right now. I always think of it as Len Duffy's building, but he's not the owner of it. It's the
Patel Block. Patel Block? No.
Optimal Energy building, which is coming. Hold on, it's up here past the church. Don't get dizzy.
Nice leisurely stroll
Yeah.
here.
I wish it was summer again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, a little hard to see with those Norway maples. But again, this is an office building that I think by anybody's, it's a historic building, by anybody's stretch, has a nice, architectural design to it. It's got regularly spaced windows.
Parking in the front.
It does have a handicap parking space in the front.
Yeah,
And I guess what I'm getting at is the ability to see into that office space what's important? Or is it the windows just being there that's important? Or does it depend on the type of use? Like, is it important if it's a use where the public is regularly congregating, like a restaurant, but not so important with an office space?
Well, we do say
So-
road-facing windows of retail establishments and restaurants. We don't say offices.
Well, that's a good point, John. Thanks for reminding me of what's
And this-
written.
We do say,
and the two, pointing out the old police station and, what is it? The Gilman Block, is that what we call it? Len's building.
I
Yeah, I
call
don't
it
know the
That-
name.
Yeah, I mean, you have a heck of a lot more than just one window every 20 feet.
You do, yeah.
Because it's residential. These were old residential buildings that have been repurposed.
I do think the 20 feet is maybe too much.
It is a bit much, yeah.
So I feel like the aim here is we don't want like a warehouse or a brick wall along the sidewalk when you're walking to the new brewery.
right.
And the window regulation is a method of attaining that. Well, what makes it not just a brick wall that is uninviting? So, we're using things like windows and entryways to say, well, what are things that we can implement, that we can require, that are going to make sure that this building isn't just boring and whatnot. So like the Kinney's building seems like the whole roof line there, that doesn't have to be there for them to conduct business inside. They've done that to make it look interesting.
Correct.
So, maybe they don't have windows that you can see inside, but does that really disqualify it from being a pleasant looking building? I feel like it would, I don't feel like I would personally disqualify, oh, you can't put that there. Personally, it seems like an inviting structure to walk by, as the town grows and people may be walking by there through a neighborhood.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah, I
the
hear
fact
what
is,
you're saying.
it is retail that, we think about, walking down little commercial streets with, stores that are inviting and windows open. And the fact is, for a commercial business, or retail business, they'd be crazy not to make it inviting. And that's the whole idea, right? Is to get people to turn off the street and walk in.
Alex,
And-
can you travel through Obashan Plaza?
I can travel by it.
Okay.
Google won't take us inside the parking area,
All
but
right.
here, let me try to do it a different way so we don't
has
get.
Google driven down Commerce Street?
Yes.
Some of the streets they haven't driven down.
So
All
here's
you can
Commerce
do is look
Street.
into them.
Oh,
And
it's so
there's,
far away, you can't
Yeah,
see it anyway.
I can zoom a little bit.
No, that's, so
Might
there's
be- it
some
might be
big
20
expanses
there.
of wall.
Yeah. It's hard to
Yeah, and
say.
I
from
think-
the, from the corner all the way to the entrance doors, that's more than 20 feet.
And in here as well, between what was Koval's, this is a very old photo,
Right.
and what was the bookstore. But I think this is actually a good example of a design you don't want to replicate, right? Like
Yeah.
a
For
lot of
number
people
reasons.
talk about that this particular lot and building is really functional and important for the businesses that it contains, but aesthetically is
It's
not really well done. And if it had more windows, well spaced out, it might be a little bit better.
Well, at least in the summertime, the hardware store has plants and things against this, the wall on the
Yep.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
they
Yeah,
didn't realize
they
there was
really
so
do
much.
utilize a good portion of that front of the building, that side of the building
their
for
products.
Yeah.
display.
absolutely.
And the 116 frontage, at least about half of it,
That's
similarly
true.
as the garden center,
Right.
and the propane filling station, but.
It seems like this is a balancing act because if a business wants to come in here and finds, oh well, I'm gonna have to add more windows to the design of my structure, at that point, well, this is gonna add costs, or I'm gonna have to go back and redesign. If we're ultimately want to encourage business development, the fewer regulations we have, obviously it's going to be easier for someone to put a business in here, but obviously we don't want to just have any structure in the town. We also want to control that to some extent. So if we did rely on, say, the business to create an inviting environment, we could limit the number of, well, you must have this many windows, or you must have, the more regulations we implement, the less likely a business may be to come to town.
Maybe, but Hinesburg is a very desirable place for, I think, for businesses to come. But it's true.
And if
We
we
should
can,
probably not be requiring gilded cherubs on the front or anything.
if we can be clear about what we want in the regulations, then nobody's coming to town not knowing what we're asking for. So nobody has to redesign anything because they didn't understand what we wanted. We've talked about clarity in our
Yep.
regulations, and that's
It
that's what we're talking about.
It definitely works both ways, Denver, that it helps provide the community with a sense that new development is not gonna look like schlock, that it'll be well done, but it also helps the developer understand that I'm not gonna have to fight with the community during my development review process because you've got specific enough standards that if I meet those, everybody should, most people should be happy.
Right.
The Kinney project is actually a good example. That went through many hearings in front of the DRB and many different architectural iterations before they finally landed on this, what we see
Still.
today. If we had had clearer design standards, I think maybe we would have hit the sweet spot of that quicker,
They know
which
what's
would have been less
expected.
work for the developer, less iterations with the architect trying to make something that the community would find palatable.
And with any luck, by the end of the year, we're gonna have pictures, pretty pictures, to accompany our.
Yes, to accompany
Design
these standards, so we
regulations.
have,
As example.
Well, if you think about Blue Cottage and that new leather shop, even DPT, there's windows in it.
You see the activity of
Yeah.
what's going on
It's very
inside.
inviting.
those buildings are very easily meet this permeability sort of test.
I think of those buildings in Virgins that we all walked around on Main Street. Retail all along one side, almost all of them are windows into the interior, whether it's a restaurant like 3 Squares, or whether it's the resale shop, or whether it's a new women's clothing shop, they all have windows in them. And they've found a way to do their displays and show their products without closing off views into the inside of the building.
Yep.
I think I'm an architect, so I think that if you have a good architect, they can deal with both the need for display areas and the need for permeability. There's just so many examples that it's been done, that for us to require it isn't putting people in a box in terms of what they have to do. That we're not so demanding that we're asking for something that nobody's ever done. This is not a moonshot. This is something that you can go in so many towns all across the country, all across the world, and find it.
Just not with
doing
drugstores,
it.
apparently.
Not with drugstores. So we're gonna need to wrap this up, and I'm thinking our next meeting. Do we have anything scheduled, or we'll be working primarily on this our
Oh, yeah.
next meeting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, this is
I
it.
can't think.
So we can take more time.
Yeah, more time. Catherine, before you came out for this, did you have any comments about?
Well, I came as a member of the village steering committee. I had actually hoped that more of us would be here. Because the committee at its last meeting talked about getting involved with this. And I wanted to kind of see what the process was and where you were at, and
It'd be great if they would join us
I
on
will
this.
take that back. I mean, the committee has, a landscape architect on it and a person with a degree in architecture and planning, not me. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to see real time where you were.
Yeah, well, this is where we are, and
In the village.
feedback for sure would be great all along the way. I can't remember our next meeting, if there's anything else scheduled, or if this is going to be our main.
I believe this is, this may be the only item.
Okay, that would.
Yeah, because the allocation was what we were building toward, and it sounds like that's gonna go offline for a little bit.
Yeah, so that would be great.
I'll share this with the committee and see if I can wrangle Lisa to come to the next meeting.
Yeah.
and-
Yeah,
I
or
would
even just feedback on, if she isn't able to. Yeah,
Be nice for you to
Yeah.
know.
yeah. Thank
I've
you.
met her. She was in the office the other day. But not about this. I would encourage the commissioners and Catherine, anyone else, to do a little walkabout between now and the next meeting, down maybe, Commerce Street and around Farmall Drive. Because I think, John, your point about, and Barbara, your point about the D Physical Therapy building and the other building where Blue Cottage is a really good one. There are a lot of windows there. This whole 20 feet of blank wall, those buildings, it's probably, 2 feet. It's like all window and doors and entryways, and they're really attractive buildings that way. But I think it would be good to walk down Commerce Street as well and understand, well, what does the post office look like? What does the vet clinic look like? What does Dark Star look like? Which is really different from these buildings. And get a sense of that. Yeah.
All right, any other comments before we move on? Okay, minutes of the January 22nd meeting. Anyone have any changes, additions? Anything they want to deny having said?
I want to say something on page 3, just above where it says minutes for January 8th meeting. It says John K. commented that it stood out to him that using a percentage of the width of the building could lead to extraordinary wide doors. I don't think I was talking about doors. I think I was talking about the windows, the same thing we've just been talking about.
Okay, anything else? Do we have a motion? Come on, people.
Make a motion to adopt the minutes,
Um,
approve the minutes, whatever.
okay. And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. Some other business? Alex, that would be you.
Oh, right. No, the correspondence was related to the allocation, and, the select board did adopt the official map. And, the zoning changes that you had forwarded to them, they held their second public hearing, last week and adopted it after that. There was basically no more public comment. Everybody had said their piece back in December, and they made the change, and so that will go into effect in a couple weeks. It takes 20 days. There's a period of time for people to petition for a townwide vote if they want. I don't foresee that happening. So yeah, congrats. You sent them something and they acted on it and it's adopted.
Does that include the green space requirement?
Yes.
Great.
Yep. So both the official map and the zoning regulations that require a certain amount of developed green space or public space now in force. Well, in 14 days or so.
Can I put us down to do the community dinner in June again? Oh, such
What's-
enthusiasm.
What kind of dinner? Is it?
Can it be
Frozen?
Italian again? Can we do Italian again? Because that was super easy to
Sure.
make a lasagna.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big hit, so, yeah. If that's,
I'm up to do it.
yep, I know Rolf probably will.
When
You
is
know,
it?
we
Be
go
the
and
last Friday in
cook
June, I
and
don't
Is
know
it
the
bring
date.
combined- is it-
food and then serve it to the community.
Is it
This is a free dinner.
Yeah,
Is it combined with the select board?
I would think so, and, you know,
Yeah, we got the
conservation
select board to
commission
join us
and
last time.
anybody
we
else
did
we
it.
can.
Okay, anything
steering
else?
committee.
So that's June 26th, according to my calendar.
Okay.
I
Any-
just had a question about, for future meeting. I don't know the details, Alex, you can fill these in. The project that is being looked at the intersection of the North Road and the road to Richmond
Yes.
by the trailer park, I saw that there was a study that is going to be made, a traffic study.
Yeah, so we did.
How did that come about and where did we get the money for it?
Yeah, good question. So, most recently, we held what was called a local concerns meeting where we told people we're thinking about improvements at that intersection and we're interested to hear what people have to say about their experiences at the intersection, you know, issues or whether they feel like it's A-okay. So we had that local concerns meeting, the consultants that are part of the project were there, took a lot of notes on people's observations, and now those consultants are working on a series of alternatives for possible improvement ideas. And then we'll have another public meeting where we will show all of those and get people's feedback. Where did it all come from in the first place?
Yeah.
Every year, the Regional Planning Commission makes available funds to do transportation planning. And they invite everybody in the county, including all the municipalities, but regular citizens as well, to suggest possible projects. And when we talked about it about a little over a year ago at the select board level, the select board was very interested in seeing a sidewalk along the Richmond Road corridor, and we had actually done a study for that previously in 2016. And they knew that this was the terminus of that sidewalk, was this intersection area. And so I forget who exactly brought up the fact that the intersection was is a little funky, but that came up, and the select board said, well, maybe we could take a look at that and see if this could be, you know, a way to study a jump starting of at least one side of that sidewalk project, you know, where it's going to end up. But the impetus is really that people have expressed concerns about safety at that intersection, and we have this sort of casual park and ride, you know, parking lot that sits in the middle of that triangle that people use, and some people wonder who's maintaining it and how that, you know, whether we could be doing something more efficient with that space.
There was even a question about who owns it.
That too. Pretty sure it's within the surrounding town road right of ways, so that we're pretty sure the town owns it, but not 100%. In any case, the select board thought, yeah, let's study that. It doesn't commit us to make any improvements, but at least we can look at options to make it safer, and maybe do something positive with that interstitial space there where the parking lot is. So that was the impetus for it, and the Regional Planning Commission provides the bulk of the funding. We have to provide a small local match, which I think was $2,000. And for that, we get the services of a transportation consultant. DuBois and King is the consultant group working on it.
So it's focused on transportation. It wasn't a meeting to talk about the neighbors up there, about what would you like to see happen up there? Maybe not even anything to do with transportation. If you look at that area, that is the most densely populated.
Yeah, we've
corner.
talked about that many times, and
Yeah,
that's an
it's not a
unused space.
study about that, although as a part of the study, there was a recognition that interstitial parking area might serve a better use. Whether it was just continued parking or maybe for some small parklet or a stormwater treatment facility or what have you. But the other conversation about should there be public facilities up in that part of town, yeah, that's not really part of this study. That's a different conversation. That's actually on your docket, but we just haven't had the time to get to it yet. We talked about maybe doing a field trip into the Birchwood neighborhood because the town owns a substantial parcel there to see if maybe it would be a suitable place for a small park.
We've applied, the planning commission, the planning department has applied for funding to do projects over the years. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we get them, sometimes we don't. Mm-hmm. This is not a project that we applied for. Planning commission didn't talk about, oh, we need to make a traffic study of that area. I don't remember ever talking about it in any serious way.
It may have been brought up because usually I advise your commission about these RPC annual projects, but yeah, I don't remember much in the way of conversation. It was mostly driven at the select board level. I think I had given them 2 project ideas, and this was the one that they thought would be affordable and still worth doing.
Well, money's always scarce. I hate to spend it on something that's just going to be put in the drawer.
Yeah, well, rest assured, the select board would, if the study says that something should happen there, and the community agrees, I think the select board would like to do something there. And although we've gotten feedback from several community members as a part of this that feel like there's nothing wrong there, there's no problem to be fixed. The vast majority have said just the opposite, that they have had direct experience with almost getting hit at that intersection because of the way the traffic flows and the way there are yield signs instead of stop signs and speed issues and all of that. So in the end, we may decide to do nothing, but there has been feedback from folks saying it's worth looking at, and there may be an improvement that would help.
I just hate to see an area like that studied initially as a traffic issue right from the beginning. Not what can we do with that space? Can we make things better? Traffic-wise, open space and so forth. And it's, you know, it's like it's already happening. It's a traffic study. So the only solutions are going to be traffic solutions. I just think that's not,
Rather than the people.
that's not a way for a group that looks at all of the planning issues of Hinesburg, our group, to spend our time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to lie to you. This is a transportation and traffic related study.
No, I know, it's clear.
It includes pedestrians and bicyclists. It's not just about cars, but it is very much
Still, it's
focused
about
on
traffic.
traffic safety at a specific problematic intersection. I mean, that's what
That
it
was
is.
the purpose of it, yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. When I look at the aerial view of that area, those mobile homes are cheek by jowl next to each other. And I just can't see us continuing to allow that kind of environment to not be improved. Let's give those folks more open space. Find a way to spread their mobile homes more apart. Can we take some of them that are now on the flat area and move them up the hill some?
Yeah,
I mean,
different project.
it's a different project, but it's a more inclusive, broader view of what this group is supposed to be doing from my point of view. We're not just the Transportation Planning Committee.
Yeah, I don't think it was a planning commission.
It wasn't. It didn't.
No,
It
it's
never
driven-
came past
It's
us.
driven largely by the funding source. Like I said, every year the Regional Planning Commission makes this available, and most of their funds go towards transportation-related projects or projects that have a transportation nexus. We've leveraged a lot of stormwater-related projects out of them that relate to stormwater coming off roads. But yeah, it's definitely one of our an annual sort of work program that we engage with that has a heavy transportation focus.
All right, anything else? Okay, everybody, meeting's over. We'll see you on the 26th. Thank you.